most of the world's media is owned by just 6. And what with the financial crisis that's going on at the moment, we'll see more and more small papers being bought up by these big players. And we don't want to see our broadcasting channels and newspapers being just bought and sold on the open market for a bit of political influence here and there. Well, this is what I think we're facing at the moment. Just to introduce myself, I'm a humanities English graduate that then got into the family aviation business. And so, of course, when I first saw 9/11 happening, I was able to have a good look at it and analyse it. I did community radio in South East London. I also worked behind the scenes on various programmes on Greater London Radio in the early 90s, which is the BBC's, or at the time was the BBC's London station. And then I got into Radio Solent and Wiltshire Sound, where I was doing documentaries and working as a freelance reporter for the BBC. Now, the reason that I've chosen the media as the important my talk today is that I think there's very few people who had really good glances behind the scenes. And just one story from my days at Radio Solent when I was working on phone-ins. We had a phone-in on the morning of the start of the first Gulf War, and for some reason nobody was phoning in. We had all these questions about what do you think of the war. I mean, this is the idea. Portsmouth was in our catchment area, and there was lots of people, military people, living in Portsmouth, and so the producer of the programme decided that we should talk about the war, but nobody was phoning in. And this was shocking to me and to everybody else. Hang on, we haven't got a programme here. There's nobody phoning in at all. So what happened then was, I was quite amazed to see, was the producer actually then got out a whole load of ideas that you might be thinking. The presenter read them out, and all of a sudden the phone line started lighting up. And see, I asked her, and she had turned to me and said, well, we haven't told them what to think yet. So that's why she had to type this little script out. Now, this is one of the things that I think she was being quite flippant. She was a very good producer. But I think this is a large part of what is going on today with our particularly broadcast mass media, is that we have to have opinions on things that we have no direct experience of. So we totally rely on the media for those things. And we're all now supposedly expected to have opinions on those things. Anyway, so I was doing a thing at environmental campaigning against land privatisation, an organisation called The Land Is Ours, which I helped to get going back in the late and early 90s. And we did various things. Probably the most famous one was taking over St George's Hill in Surrey, which was squatted by people in the English Civil War, and 350 years ago, as a protest at that civil war. And I'll be talking later about how we may be facing a civil war in the future. I'm also now editor of something called 911forum.org.uk, which is a UK forum to discuss issues relating to the war on terror. And as Andy was saying earlier on, he's absolutely right. 9/11 is a crucial incident, and once you understand 9/11, then you understand exactly what this war on terror means. And I think it's pretty clear to me to see that the media is a major, major factor. The people would never have carried out 9/11 who carried it out if they hadn't been able to guarantee that the media was going to be reasonably compliant. And of course, they bounced the media into giving an initial view of what 9/11 was, which then it's very difficult for the media to pick apart, even though they could do, afterwards. So the context for this talk, really, let's just go along here. I mean, this is the thing that we're seeing at the moment, which is this kind of control grid slowly being foisted on us. And what I'd also like to say at this point is that I think there's lots and lots of people in the establishment, in the police, and in the media who are dead against this, which is great to see. I think there's people do have some reasonably long memories about this whole can I see your papers, please, business with the Nazis. So there's also an unprecedented division of wealth now not just between the rich and the poor as individuals, but also between individuals and corporations. Corporations, and as we've seen recently, banks, are sucking up more and more and more and more of the wealth on this planet and leaving less and less and less for us. This is an unprecedented thing. We've also seen creeping privatisation, not just since Margaret Thatcher. Privatisation started well before that. with enclosure of land particularly, that was what was called in the Civil War a common treasury for all, a free gift to mankind, however you want to look at it. But slowly but surely land has been privatised over the last 400 or 500 years, but particularly after the English Civil War, which was crucial in land privatisation. I'd also like to mention a chap called Charlie Richardson. Now, has anyone heard of Charlie Richardson? He was a criminal in the 1960s and 70s in South London, very well known. And Charlie has a fantastic quote from Charlie Richardson. He was arrested under, I think, the Wilson government or the Callaghan government. Finally, it was a sort of organised criminal. And one of the things he said was absolutely incredible, I thought. He was released in 1984, and he went straight into a job. I mean, the Richardson brothers were famous for using bolt cutters to cut off the toes of their people who'd crossed them in South London. And then he went straight out, in 1984, straight out of jail into a job in the City of London. And he said, "The city is far more dishonest than anything I ever did before. Privatisation of the post office, telephones, electricity and water is really what he's talking about." Because he said, the biggest organised crime in Britain was performed by the government stealing something the British people already owned and selling it back to them. So the banksters have a monopoly on money creation and profiting from war. They have these private banks which are monopolies on our means of exchange. And this, again, reflects on the original Civil War, because one of the big complaints in the original Civil War was monopolies. Back in the 1600s, exactly the same stuff was happening. You know, there were toll roads, all this kind of thing starting. And so that's one of the reasons I think, you know, we could be moving towards a Civil War type situation. The other thing, of course, is information warfare. This is absolutely key, and this is why the media is a key battleground in all this, is because this is where we get most of our information from. And it's, you know, and I think it's true to say that the media is a target, a military target now. Many journalists don't realise this, many producers and even newspaper editors aren't necessarily sure, but it's a covert target. There's black operations taking place against journalists. As we saw at this year's Bilderberg meeting, for anyone that was following it, the journalists are arrested, harassed and harried under the guise of security, but actually it's because they don't want any information whatsoever to get out about this conference. So and I'll be talking a bit more about Bilderberg later on. So this, what we have on the screen here, is a very, very important operation of NATO, which has been one of the most secret, at the time it was said it was the most secret thing. So there we have two NATO people blowing up some innocent people. And this was going on in the 70s and the 80s, mainly in Europe. NATO intelligence, based in Brussels at NATO headquarters, were organising fascists to go and blow up ordinary people across Europe and blame it on the extreme left. Now, this was because they wanted everyone to be afraid of the Soviet Union. And this was happening in Italy particularly, but also in Belgium and other places like that. So there we go. This is a chap who was in charge of SS Panzer Corps in the Second World War, Paul Hauser, and he's actually quoted as saying that NATO was formed from the international brigades of the SS. And there's more information come to light in the Daily Mail about this recently, from the Second World War. So what I think is what we're seeing now is a kind of covert Nazism resurfacing. This is their sort of modus operandi of this kind of, what I like to call a Nazi mafia. So what we have here is a private military companies. Now look at Iraq. Isn't it wonderful? The news is saying the troops have all come back, but what's actually happening on the ground is that it's mostly private military companies that are now running the security. And of course, the soldiers who've left the army and are now working for private military security and mercenaries get paid far, far more than they did as soldiers. So it's really a kind of a lie to say that, you know, there's none of our soldiers out in Iraq still. So we have things like fake political accidents, fake political suicides, false flag terror, which is where the blame is pinned on a different country or a different faction, and a Gulf of Tonkin style incident, which is an attack on your own actual forces, like an aircraft or a naval ship. So these are the kinds of modus operandi we're seeing from this faction. Yeah, so the other thing about Gladio is if you haven't seen this series, get hold of a copy of it, have a watch of it. The producer that made it, Alan Frankovich, died in mysterious circumstances going over to interview an ex-head of the CIA at Houston Airport. He went into the customs and never came out again. Alan Frankovich was working for BBC 2 Time Watch series, and this is really difficult to actually get a hold of a copy of this, but it exposes this whole NATO killing European civilians program. Here's just one example. Bologna railway station blown to pieces, 80-something people killed in 1990. And this happened also in Northern Ireland, Force Research Unit, where the British Army was colluding with loyalist terrorists, supplying them with bombs and this sort of thing. So Northern Ireland is a little bit closer to home. This is Brigadier Gordon Kerr. Now, apparently he was working out in Iraq, so I'm not quite sure where he is now, but the Stevens report into the collusion in Northern Ireland fingered Gordon Kerr. So, I mean, if I was Gordon Kerr wandering around the streets of Britain now, I would wonder if I was going to have my collar felt, because he was shown to have been a key person in feeding explosives to loyalist terrorists. So this is another aspect of all this, is we've got this kind of religious war going on, an attempt to get these various factions fighting each other. Particularly, I have to say at the moment, you can see it's the Judaism and Islam is at loggerheads. This is Temple Mount. This is definitely a place to watch for the future, because what we've got here is a complete clash of ideologies, religious ideologies. This is the place in Jerusalem where the old temple was, the old Jewish temple, Solomon's temple. And what's happened is there's now a Muslim mosque, the second most holy mosque, I believe, in Islam, on the same site. And there's constant clashes. The certain factions amongst the Jews want to get rid of this mosque and build their temple, and obviously that's going to cause all sorts of mayhem. Even when there's an attempt to build the cornerstone of the temple, you'll find there's clashes in Jerusalem. Obviously, Jerusalem is a city to watch, but this is a particularly interesting and rather worrying spot. So I also come from a sort of pretty much traditional Christian point of view, in that I think a lot of these things are there in prophecy, particularly in Daniel and the book of Revelation. And I've got a little handout for anyone that's interested afterwards. I've done an analysis of Revelation, looking at some of the things which are there's something like 22, 23 different events that Revelation prophesies for the final clash of civilizations. Anyway, the context really, we move on to talking about the media. Now, how many people here, I'll just do a little quick survey, think the media is controlled? Most people, right, okay. Well, I have to disagree with you, actually, because last week, I mean, is it just this week? No, last week, there's some amazing revelations came out in The Guardian about this MP's expenses scandal. They have done some really good investigative journalism, which I don't think anybody here has the resources to do, and that is to find out exactly what happened to this leak. For example, I'll be talking about this a little bit later, but the media is a major battleground. It's not controlled. It's a place where everybody's fighting for control still. And also, you'll see on Channel 4 News and Newsnight and places like that, you will often find very important bits of investigative journalism coming out still. So I think we must be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. There's also lots of beleaguered journalists who are losing spirit, and they need to be sort of bigged up and be told, just keep on keeping on, guys. And if you can't work as a staff journalist, work as a freelance journalist and get your stuff out elsewhere. But you have to remember that the journalists do not control the transmitters, the journalists do not control the printing presses. It's other people like the Barclay brothers, who own the Daily Telegraph, that control that printing press. And it's very, very difficult for journalists sometimes to get stories out. And they will tell you there are all sorts of areas that can be career suicide. But the BBC is something I wanted to talk about a little bit now, because that's quite well documented what happened to that. Now, I don't know if anybody noticed, but something's happened to the BBC in the last 30 years. I'm sure you have noticed. There's this new kind of person on the Board of Governors, which is now the Trust. Pauline Neville-Jones is from Kinetic, which is a private military company. It's the privatised version of what used to be DERA, Defence Evaluation Research Establishment. So we see now a very different type of BBC. I think there's something unsatisfying about it, watching the BBC these days and listening to it. It's like a low-calorie meal or something. Having said that, there are some really good, I don't know if anyone here saw the Red Riding series, there's still some good stuff going on. So just remember, it's not controlled, it's a battleground, and people are fighting to get good drama and good journalism out there still. They haven't given up yet. Now, this is really when the BBC had its biggest problem, right, which was 1986. This guy was Director General. He was Alistair Milne, and he was a producer and writer on the Old Tonight programme, which was around before Newsnight, I believe. I think I was too young, really, to be able to stay up and watch Tonight. But he also worked on That Was the Week That Was, and other programmes. But then he worked his way up through the management to become Director General. His son is Seamus Milne, who was, until recently, I looked at The Guardian recently, he's not anymore, but he was comments editor at The Guardian. And in 1986, Alistair Milne was sacked over several programmes that he'd approved. And one of them was called Maggie's Militant Tendency. This was a BBC, I think, Panorama documentary, which at the time there was all this talk about Labour left militant. I don't know if you remember that, the militant tendency, but this programme was all about Maggie's militant tendency, and it showed the far right of the Tory party. Remember, this is during a Thatcher government, and she went absolutely livid that they were showing that there were fascists in the Tory party. And this was good old independent BBC Panorama having a go. There was also another series called Secret Society by Duncan Campbell. He was an investigative journalist, not to be confused with the guy who's the crime writer in The Guardian, writing about American military power in Britain. And Duncan Campbell's series, Secret Society, is one of the most riveting documentary programmes I've ever seen. It had all sorts of little things to do with top secret stuff, including the Zircon spy satellite, the fact that the £500 million of public money had been secretly spent on this spy satellite, that it didn't look like it was ever going to work. He had a programme all about that. He also had one on emergency planning, that is to say, if there's a national emergency, what would happen? And it turns out that all us would be co-opted to work for these kind of American organisations. This is all back in 1986. And there was also a very good programme on secret cabinet committees. These cabinet committees which go off and research, shall we buy the Trident missile system? And they come back to the cabinet and say, basically, yes, we must. But anyway, these are secret committees, and often there's a majority of people who aren't even in the cabinet on that committee. So this was explosive material, and Alistair Milne was backing this stuff to the hilt, and he was nobbled. So he was replaced by an accountant, took over as Director General. It's the first time a programme maker had never been the Director General, called Michael Checkland, and then a chap called John Burt. But this whole operation was conducted by the Chairman of the Board of Governors of the BBC, Marmaduke Hussey. And you may wonder what is the point of going through all this now? Because up until then, it had been a fantastic place for journalists to work, the BBC, and now it's a kind of uphill struggle ever since this event, really, getting rid of this Director General. Marmaduke Hussey had just come from The Times. He was managing editor of The Times. And what he'd done there is he destroyed the newspaper, ready for Rupert Murdoch to buy it up cheap. He'd had a long, protracted strike. The company was almost on its knees. And so when Rupert Murdoch came along, he could buy it from Marmaduke Hussey, and I think it was Thompson Group that owned it at the time, for next to nothing. And of course, it's The Times and the Sunday Times. So Marmaduke Hussey had just finished doing this when he was then put in charge of the BBC. And in Hussey's autobiography, I was really interested to read that he did talk about this episode, but he mentioned the name of somebody called Victor Rothschild as approaching him just before this whole incident, who was obviously very friendly with Mrs. Thatcher. Rothschild was one of the people behind the poll tax, and saying, "Can you sack the Director General, Marmaduke?" So it's interesting to see these little hidden hands behind the scenes. Marmaduke Hussey, what he was doing in his autobiography was making sure that nobody totally put the blame on him, that people knew where, and you can go and have a look at his autobiography if you want at any time, that who was actually egging him on and who was behind this. Now there's John Burt. He was Director General when I was working there. He basically tried to turn the BBC into some kind of mountain of paperwork that you had to sign to do anything, whereas it was very much a kind of cooperative organisation pretty much when I was there. Another time that Victor Rothschild crops up is in this book. How many of you have actually read Spycatcher? Is anyone? A few. Because this is you can get this in these little charity shops now, and it is a riveting read. No wonder Mrs. Thatcher wanted to try and stop it at the time. I don't know if you remember, it was published in Australia, but not here. People were sending clandestine copies over by post from Australia. But in this, one of the interesting things that Peter Wright says is that shows how much Victor Rothschild was also involved in the appointment of the new heads of MI5 and MI6 behind the scenes. Please, if you've not read Spycatcher, have a good look. You can see all sorts of stuff. It's like a peep behind the curtain. Anyway, so we have a situation now with all this global media. We've got these 6 kind of main global media corporations. And I think it's fair to say that the media is covertly, anyway, no one is overtly talking about this, the greatest prize of all. If you control the media, then you really do control the hearts and minds of the population. And this is not just about the UK. This is a global battle. But do you think the British public are really that credulous? I'm not so sure. Whether even with total control of the media, people will still believe it. As happened in Soviet Russia, people started just taking no notice of what they were seeing on the television and reading through it, reading between the lines. So just be aware that this is the model for the future, is a tiny number of massive media barons controlling almost everything we see in here and read. So, and cross-media ownership as well is gone. The idea that someone who owns a printing house or a newspaper shouldn't own a broadcaster, shouldn't own a radio station is out of the window. We've got, as I was driving down last night, we've got something called Heart FM. Now that is supposed to be a local radio station. That is local radio franchises which are sold out by Ofcom, but actually, of course, it's one company with loads and loads and loads of local stations, so there's really no local interest. In fact, they're doing something called news hubbing, which is where they have somewhere like Bristol, which is doing the news for all sorts of areas in the whole of the southwest of England. So they can say that they're doing the news for Plymouth, for example, but actually they're sitting in a studio in Bristol. So this is the kind of stuff that's going on. Consolidation into very, very few hands, very few owners, very few editors. And this is the message from an old traveller bus from a while ago. I don't know if people remember the traveller convoy in the 1980s. Fight truth decay. And there are people fighting truth decay out there. One of them is this organisation called Spinwatch. Spinwatch.org, one of the most important websites out there for journalists. And in fact, whenever there's a big story with some sort of slightly iffy expert involved, you'll find the Spinwatch, poor old Spinwatch website goes down because there's so much demand on the site. This is run by from Strathclyde University. What they're talking about, these people, is front groups. That is to say, health organisations, for example, that make out that they're a little independent organisation. They're actually covertly run by slimming food companies and this kind of thing. It's a really interesting site, and again, another peek behind the curtain. And yes, a guy called David Miller actually runs it. So this Newsnight investigation, this is why I'm telling you the media is not controlled. There are still some free-thinking, independent-minded journalists and good professional journalists in there. Not all of the Newsnight reports are quite the same, of course. I noticed just the other night that they had 2 Bilderberg people on at the same time. That is Ken Clark and Peter Mandelson, who are supposed to be in different parties, comparing notes on the issues. You know, so Newsnight aren't quite up to speed on that. But they did a brilliant investigation. This is towards the end of last year. And there are 3 different types of propaganda. This is the Spinwatch people that we were seeing from before. White propaganda, which promotes things like the British Foreign Office, interests abroad. That is to say, there's an organisation called the British Council, which is all around the world, and there are several others. But that's white propaganda. In the US, it's called the US Information Agency. So these are quite overt propaganda organisations, although they won't necessarily call themselves propaganda. They're there to push the national interest abroad. Then there's grey propaganda, which is just lies. Now, if you churn out enough lies and shove them under the noses of journalists, then often those lies just get repeated and repeated all around the world. So that's grey propaganda. And if you were to bother to check those lies, you'll find immediately that they're lies. But there's not really much of an attempt to check it. But the worst stuff, of course, is this black propaganda, which is very carefully planted and covered, and it would reflect extremely badly on the true source. As a case in point is this Newsnight investigation into radical books which were being sold, supposedly, from Muslim bookshops at the mosques around Britain. Now, newspapers all around Britain and around the world ran with this story, that these radical books which are sort of sexist material, racist material, were being sold by Muslim bookshops attached to mosques around Britain. This was the story. About a week later, Newsnight had finished their thorough investigation of the evidence for this and found that actually there's no such thing going on at all. Here's one of the receipts for these books. The handwriting is actually the same handwriting on 2 receipts from 2 different parts of the country. And here's another one. This receipt is completely false. It was printed out on an inkjet printer, made up and just kind of, obviously what they've done is they've scanned in a real receipt and then printed this book, written this book as a receipt on there. Now this is quite sophisticated propaganda, as you can see. A lot of time and effort and money has gone into this attempt to demonise the Muslims. Now this is all this information was put out by David Cameron's precious favourite think tank called the Policy Exchange in London. And it's all falsified information run by somebody called Dean Godson. He's the director of research there. Now, the other thing is that these people, Dean Godson and his brother, Roy Godson, are very, very close friends with the anti-terror police. So they're considered to be brilliant advisors. But what they're doing is they're faking up all this information. As we saw recently with the case in London with Bob Quick, who had his little, do you remember the little leaflet that he had by his side where the photographers got all these names off it? All that, it seems, was total nonsense as well. So there's lots and lots and lots of faked up information being shoved under the noses of our politicians. Here's another one. This one, they couldn't even get the address right on this receipt that they'd done. So as you can see, there's lots of fake stuff out there. So here's Dean, wonderful Dean Godson, and the man from Policy Exchange. Here's his brother, Roy Godson. Now, this is a fantastic and really interesting little book. As you can see here, Dirty Tricks or Trump Cards. So this is a well-funded, well-organised disinformation, lie, propaganda campaign. And the trouble is, who has got the time to go into, in depth, all of the evidence that these sorts of organisations are putting forward? Because, of course, Policy Exchange, the next load of propaganda won't come through them. It will come through somebody else. Roy Godson is involved with something called the Heritage Foundation, and he was investigated as part of the Iran-Contra scandal. Now, we all know about Iran-Contra, at least I hope we do. This was a massive kind of drug-running organisation which was funneling money down to the right-wing rebels in Nicaragua, the Contras, and the most incredible thing about that was they were all proven to have been involved in this thing, and this was a whole load of people, including Oliver North, etc. The only thing was, nothing was done about it, because Bush Sr. pardoned them all. So these people are still around and, of course, still very influential in US politics. Okay, and the other one I think is called, here he is, there's Roy, Strategic Denial and Deception, the 21st Century Challenge. But this has got a chapter in it, this one, by a guy called Abram Shulsky, who was one of the people in charge of the Office of Special Plans at the Pentagon, who put together the case for the Iraq War. So these are not nice people. What they're doing is they have a whole industry of very, very convincing, so long as you don't thoroughly check it, disinformation. And also, this is one of the quite scary things as well. Dean is also the author of David Trimble's biography. Now, David Trimble, of course, was the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland and links with the Orange Order. So we're starting to look at these kind of secret society networks, possibly here. Now, I have to also say, because I'm in a way doing a little bit of a defence of journalism, as you might have noticed. And if anybody hasn't seen or read this book, please do. If you're interested in the state of journalism in Britain and helping decent journalists get the truth out, get hold of a copy of this. This is Nick Davis, who's a freelancer in Brighton, lives in Brighton. And most journalists in the country, anyone with a conscience is reading this. This is doing really well, his book. But what he's doing is he's picking apart exactly what is wrong with British journalism. This is helping a lot. And it's also giving, shall we say, a little bit more ammunition to journalists to challenge their editors, to challenge their managers, and sometimes to join more independent newspapers and even to set up new news outlets. So if you haven't had a look at this, and if you're interested in the way that we get our news in this country and what you can do to help, then get a hold of a copy of Flat Earth News. It's quite a nice, ironic title, but he's put a hell of a lot of work into that, Nick, along with a whole team of people. So, there's also whilst we're talking about disinformation, another really important angle to all this, and that is MI6, which is our Foreign Intelligence Service down on the River Thames there, that hideous-looking building, IOPS, which is short for Information Operations. And what they do is they basically push pro-Foreign Office policy stories in the mainstream press. And often this stuff gets rolled out week after week. One of the people who it appears has been doing that is this chap, Con Coughlin from The Telegraph. And it's interesting that The Telegraph is part of this scandal at the moment, but also Dominic Lawson from the Sunday Telegraph has also been linked to IOPS in the past by Annie Machon and other people. So there are all sorts of ways of getting these lies into our newspapers, and I think the more aware we are of this, the less possible it is for them to do it, to actually get away with it. So yeah, just be aware, MI6 is probably one of the... What they do is they just basically, they don't necessarily bribe... These journalists aren't agents, it's just that they are brought into this kind of spell of, oh yeah, we've got the real information here. So they might give the journalists one or two really decent stories, but then they'll sucker them into running something which is total nonsense. And one of the things which has been all the time Con Coughlin has been writing about in The Telegraph is what a danger Iran is. So it's inflating this kind of picture of the Iranians as having to be stopped, controlled, invaded or whatever, which is actually really quite, it's very, very provocative. Personally, I think the Iranians already have nuclear weapons. I mean, having seen a documentary back in the 1990s, on the television which showed nuclear weapons from the ex-Soviet Union, I think it was in Ukraine, which were unguarded, in a base unguarded, which were then being taken down to Iran. I think the Iranians probably do already have nukes, which is why maybe they're saying, if you invade us, you will get a big surprise. So I think we should just let the Iranians have their bit of culture and leave them alone, personally. And obviously they feel threatened by the Israeli nuclear weapons as well. Anyway, let's go on to talk about some more specific stories. Here are the Bilderbergers, one of my favourite subjects. This is the hotel where they had their first meeting back in 1954. Now, sorry, another little survey. How many people know about the Bilderbergers, have heard about them? Most people. Good. Okay. So this hotel was owned by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was, before the Second World War and at the beginning of the Second World War, was an enthusiastic member of the SS. He was an SS officer. And so he was the guy that started the first meeting. Now, it's interesting that Wikipedia censors any of the references, at least it did up until a few weeks ago, to the SS being involved in forming the first Bilderberg meetings. So this is actually a picture inside that first meeting in Oosterbeek, which is one of the, if not the only picture inside a Bilderberg conference. And there's Prince Bernhard sitting up at the podium there, as if butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. This is an organisation which is definitely partly set up by these people, the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations in the States. That is, this whole network of institutes for international affairs all over the world are basically private clubs which run, or at least attempt to run, the foreign policy of the country. So constantly, the Foreign Secretary, although he's probably willingly doing this Miliband, but however patriotic or however honest a Foreign Secretary is, he's always got to fight against this big private club which is telling him what his foreign policy should be. And this is in St James's Square in London. This is where the Bilderberg conference was in 2007, which is a big hotel in Istanbul. And this is a little Finnish newspaper. We don't get quite this coverage in the English newspapers of a Bilderberg conference, but in Finland they get quite good coverage. And you can see there's a sort of bird's eye view of what it looks like and some of the characters involved in Bilderberg. One of the big organisations connected with the Bilderbergs is this bank, very secretive bank, the Bank for International Settlements in Basel in Switzerland, which was set up after the First World War to administer German war reparations. And it ended up being used in the run-up to the Second World War to fund Hitler. So after World War II, at the Bretton Woods Conference, there was a motion passed to abolish the bank, because they were saying, look, just a minute, we set up this bank to do the war reparations, and it ended up funding Hitler. Let's just get rid of it. And they passed the resolution, but the bank still stayed there. And here it is. It's on a first and second floor office above a chocolate shop opposite the main railway station in Basel, totally anonymous. You can't actually really see it there, but that was one of the main banks in the world, was based there. And the BIS has representatives from all the central banks, and this is one of the sort of things that you may have heard of, the gnomes of Zurich. This is the kind of, actually it's in Basel. But anyway, nowadays they've come out into the open and they've got something called the Tower of Basel, and here it is. So if you're ever in Basel in Switzerland, go and have a look at that. I had a chap emailed me a whole load of pictures. He said, I thought I'd go and check it out, and this is one of the pictures he sent me. But he said, for the whole of the rest of the time I was in Switzerland, I was being followed around everywhere. And he actually even sent me some pictures of the guys that have been following him. So quite a secretive place, and they're very paranoid about anybody knowing who they are, what they do. Because basically what they do is they give out big slices of cash in order to help, say, an individual country somewhere that's having problems with its finances. Then, of course, once you've had a few loans from the Bank for International Settlements, they say, well, you've had enough loans from us now, go and talk to the IMF, and they'll tell you what you're going to have to privatise in order to keep getting your money. This is also very much connected with Bilderberg. This is the Yalta Conference in 1944, where Europe was divided up. There's Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin. There's Bernhard, again, who died a couple of years ago. But after his death, there was a very good program on Radio 4 which explained how his chairmanship of KLM, Royal Dutch Airlines, was abused by Bernhard to help smuggle Nazis who'd been sprung from jail, some of them, Nazi war criminals, over to South America. So you can see the media isn't totally controlled. There are a few documentaries that come out which are really interesting, but often you don't hear anything about them the next day. And there's nothing in the paper about it afterwards either, even though there's a lot of impact in what they're saying. Here's another person who's very much involved. Lord Carrington was chairman of the Bilderberg conferences, and also, funnily enough, he was Defence Secretary during Bloody Sunday in Northern Ireland. There he is in his garden. I don't know how well you can see that, but he's got some sort of strange figure there. He's got a banana up his nose, or I don't know exactly what, and a pair of scissors at the bottom. Don't quite know what all that symbolism is supposed to mean, but he's a peculiar character. And nowadays, the chairman is this guy, Etienne d'Avignon, who's also a Viscount. And it's funny, isn't it, because we start with a Lord, and we've got a Viscount, and now we've got a Queen. So there's all sorts of people involved in the Bilderberg conference who are royalty, nobility of some sort, and a mixture of bankers and a few politicians. And I can also tell you that if you see someone's been to a Bilderberg conference, it doesn't mean to say that they're on board with the Bilderberg way of doing things at all. Because I had a chat with the Greek finance minister who came out because he wanted to get some fresh air. He said it's absolutely suffocating in there. And he said, and also the price of cigarettes is far too much, so he'd come out to get some fags. He was very happy to talk to the journalists. He said, I'm really sorry, I brought a copy of the list of people who are here, the journalists, but the bloody security took it away from me just before I came out. So there are people in there who are not happy to be there. So if you see someone's on the list, it doesn't mean to say they're really a Bilderberger, so to speak. There's Queen Sophia, shot by me through her window as she's going into the conference. Now here's a success story, if ever there was one. Conrad Black's now behind bars, and he was the main Bilderberg representative for Canada. In fact, he hosted the Bilderberg conference, I think it was in 1996 himself. But he's now behind bars for fraud, embezzlement, and all sorts of things. And this is the way to go, I think, is to prosecute these people for war crimes or whatever other crimes through the courts. Here's another Bilderberger. Sure you recognise that one. Lord Mandelson's known to be very close to the Rothschilds. And Kenneth Clark. Now, interestingly enough, he didn't appear on this year's list. There was a faxed list for the Bilderberg meeting, which was about 2 weeks ago, and no Kenneth Clark on the list. I wonder if he's getting a little bit worried, a bit sensitive, that people know what he's up to, what he's about. There's lots of people that don't appear on the list. When I was there, you could see cars arriving at the conference, and with no idea who was in that car. Blacked out windows completely, going around the back of the hotel, etc. And so Ken Clark is, as far as I know, still the main representative of the Bilderberg in Britain. So he's the person on the steering committee that decides who's going to be invited, etc., etc. Another man he is being mobbed in Ireland as he's going to talk at some university, foolishly. Our friend Henry Kissinger, who I think it's fair to say runs probably the biggest protection racket in the world. So if you're a little country who's having a few problems with insurgency or whatever, you go to the United Nations. After about a year of more people dying, you get your credit card out and you phone Henry Kissinger and he sorts it out for you. Control the energy and you control the nations. This is a Kissinger quote. Control the food and you control the people. So he's certainly getting to the point where his view or his idea of controlling energy we're getting close. But is he going to control our food too? Well, you can see there's a lot, Tesco's control a vast amount of food in this country. Here's another guy, David Rockefeller, from the Rockefeller oil dynasty, with his bodyguard on the left-hand side there. That was shot, and there's Chris Bollin behind taking a picture. So, this is something that came out recently in the Daily Mail. And if you can read that, it says Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, 7th of November 1944. Because, of course, Bilderberg was very much tied in with the formation of the European Union. It was said by an American ambassador to Germany, that the first meetings of the European Union were actually first got together by the Bilderberg conferences. And this is in 7th of November 1944, and it's a British intelligence report, plans of German industrialists to engage in underground activity after Germany's defeat and the flow of capital to neutral countries. So this was British intelligence picking up on the fact that the Nazis already had a plan. They knew they were going to lose the war. They already had a plan to make sure that they had a good network so that once the war was finished, 10, maybe 15 years later, they could all start to get together and reorganize again. But the most important thing was that they were going to be using all these corporations to fund it, a kind of covert Nazi network. And here's good old Jim Tucker, who's been covering the Bilderberg conferences for years, and this year too. But this is something which is kind of connected to it. There's a lot of people who go to the Bohemian Grove in California, which is this sort of little festival that goes on over one night, a couple of days for the people that stay there longer. But there's this giant owl. Most people, I imagine, would have seen this before. And here's a little boat with some kind of mock human sacrifice on it. Now, what is all this about? The thing that strikes me, though, there's a guy called Joe Skelton up in Yorkshire, I think that runs a website about this. But one of the things Joe discovered was that the owl that's at Bohemian Grove is only a relatively recent thing. Back in the 1920s, this was what was at Bohemian Grove in place of the owl. Isn't that strange? Now, go and check Joe's site out. What on earth is a Buddha doing there, The owl, the Buddha, what is going on over there? Anyway, this is, I think, sort of the main kind of theory here, which is, order from chaos. And there's a bit of 9/11, which is the biggest criminal act of history, I think, most probably. And there you can see quite clearly stuff being exploding, Anthrax letters sent to the senators and the press. In other words, basically, these are the most important institutions that are going to get the truth out, the press and democratic institutions. And, of course, they all sent these anthrax letters, which turn out later to be American military-grade anthrax from Fort Detrick. So I don't think we need to be looking in a cave in Afghanistan to find where they came from. I think 9/11, I don't want to go too much into it, but this is one of the best books I've found, which also goes into the political side of it. There's a brilliant chapter in this called Angel is Next, to show how Bush, Bush didn't know about 9/11 happening. He was forced during the day to come on board with this, it's all Al-Qaeda. And this goes into that in quite a lot of detail. His life was threatened. I think he was told that Air Force One will be shot down unless you start complying. Because I think Dick Cheney's the main man behind 9/11, certainly within the White House. And it's come out through Seymour Hersh recently also that Cheney was running death squads from the White House, and people like senators were being killed by Cheney who were actually from the White House. Now, this is not me, this is Seymour Hersh. And this is one thing I say with everything I'm talking about. Please, don't just believe me, go and check it for yourselves, because we're living in an age now where you just simply cannot rely on information. You do have to have a bit of a depth of knowledge. Go out and look things up for yourself. If you think you're in doubt about something, find the time, take the time to just check it through. Switch off the TV for a little while and read a book or get on the internet. Now, here, as I was talking about possible political assassinations, I'm not saying Robin Cook was murdered, but he did get taken away in the helicopter of death. He was reasonably okay when he got into the helicopter. By the time he arrived at the hospital, he was gone. But his wife wasn't allowed to get into the helicopter with him, which I find most peculiar. Actually, really quite worrying that his wife wasn't allowed to go with him. If your loved one was going off to hospital in a helicopter, wouldn't you like to go with them? So why wasn't she allowed into there? Now, of course, Robin Cook was brilliant. I mean, from a media point of view, he was wiping the floor with the Americans on the Today programme, on Newsnight, on the news programmes, Channel 4 News, all the time. And I think he was a very brave man. And he probably would have been the leader of this country now if he hadn't been spirited off of a mountain in Scotland. Another one, this is the field where David Kelly died. His body was moved, etc. I don't know if people have seen the BBC Conspiracy Files documentary into his death. It's actually one of the better ones in that series. It looks at both sides, quite balanced. And I spoke to the producer of that programme, and he's also told me that the police told him that it was what they call a wet disposal. So something funny going on with the David Kelly death, obviously. I think that's most people in this country are very suspicious about that, particularly the fact that he was just at the time, a crucial time, just before the war was about to start, he was saying the government is talking nonsense. Now, we've got a little bit of sound for you now, which is something. We're going on to the subject of 7/7, and I hope you're going to be able to play it from the back there, because I was going to be able to do it from here. But this is one of the guys who says, whether he's crazy or not, I have no idea. I don't think he is. But this is what he says went on, not on the underground train that you can see here, but on the bus. Can you just play that audio clip, please? This is Daniel Obachicki speaking. At least I hope. I
stood downstairs and waited for people to go past me, and they were all asking me questions. They were as lost as me and saying, does this bus go here? Does this bus go King's Cross? Does this bus go everywhere? And then no one fit in the description of that guy. I think his name's Hasib Hussein. He's some big hefty guy with a big massive rucksack. Now, I was standing there, people were brushing past me. I never saw no big hench guy with a rucksack go past me. That's it. Now, people might like to speculate that he was already on board the bus from a previous bus stop. I mean, that's something which someone has tried to suggest. I actually saw an individual with a grey, light grey top and a dark grey two-tone rucksack, brown hair, who was sitting upstairs. He had a rucksack. Then he came downstairs. I'm standing downstairs. I'm saying, why is the guy sitting upstairs, then sitting downstairs? To me, I came to the conclusion that he must have been the bomber. He must have planted something upstairs, then sat downstairs. And obviously he got off in the minute before the bomb went off, when the bus driver opened the doors for no apparent reason when there was no bus stop. He was a European male in his mid-20s, brown, mousy hair. He had I remember his kind of shower-proof top. It was light grey, and the two-tone rucksack. And that's all I really remember of him. He did look at me hesitantly a couple of times, and I looked back at him. I thought he was just another lost kind of person. I thought that's the reason he was looking at me. And he got off. He was actually the very last person to get off that bus before the driver shut the door, and then the bomb went off 60 seconds or so later. I remember this like it was yesterday. I mean, for some reason I was standing there. I was really thinking I shouldn't be on this bus. I should be on the bus in front. That's why I was getting a bit agitated there, and I was seeing what was going on, the delays, and I was looking out the window and saying, why the hell is this bus getting nowhere? So when you're in that state, looking at things and questioning everything, that's how I am as a person, I suppose. I mean, I saw this guy, and the thing which made me ask questions was, why did the bus driver stop the bus?
Okay, thanks. So that just gives you an idea. There's a completely different version of events there, totally different. And this is why there's only been an official Metropolitan Police inquiry into this, which, for example, hasn't questioned a lot of the people that were even involved. And many of the people that appeared in the press in the week or so after the 7/7 were people that couldn't really remember any of the details of the incident. Isn't that peculiar? So this is really our 9/11. I would say 7/7, the London bombings, is a much more sophisticated operation than 9/11. 9/11 was fairly big, and there were some obvious real problems with 9/11. 7/7 is much more difficult to untangle, and that's why I think it's absolutely essential that we have a fully independent inquiry of some sort. I've also got in the bookshop this afternoon at lunchtime, if anyone wants, I've got a collection of the 6 documentaries which have already been made, none of which obviously been shown on television, into the London bombings for people to buy for a tenner if you're interested. But this is our 9/11, and we're kind of at the point now where there's going to be a programme on apparently in a couple of months, which I'm featuring in one of the conspiracy file programs, where they're going to float some of these big questions about 7/7 for the first time. I've no doubt they're going to rip me to pieces, but that's not what this is about. This is about getting the questions out to the public, the serious questions out to the public. The serious questions about 7/7 are the 8-minute warning received by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was in London that day. Why is Benjamin Netanyahu getting an 8-minute warning? And of course, those articles disappeared off the internet almost straight away afterwards. I mean, I've got PDF copies of them because I was thinking, gosh, this is going to disappear soon. And sure enough, it did. There's also the controlled demolition company's van, which is right next to the number 30 bus. Bizarrely, Kingstar, a company called Kingstar. It certainly looks like military explosives were used on 7/7, not this homemade TATP stuff. Then also we've got the fact that Sir Paul Condon in 1997 said we've got between 100 and 250 corrupt police officers in Scotland Yard, and I can do nothing about it. So that's another factor in why 7/7 may be not being, or the truth may not be being told about that. And last but not least, Peter Power and his wonderful same 3 tube stations where he was doing his terror drills by some amazing coincidence, which is around about, a few of us sat and worked it out, it's about 7 billion to 1. So here's an interesting shot from the evidence, and this is a book which Nick Colostrom is bringing out in the next few months or weeks. This is just a pre-publication copy of it, but this is probably the first book to look at the possibility that these guys were just totally patsies. They were innocent patsies who were sucked in to, and they should be being called alleged bombers by everybody, but of course most of the press now just calls them the bombers. This one here is, if you have a look at the date on that, this is being one of those pictures which is touted around as a CCTV evidence. It actually is the 28th of the 6th, 05. It's not even the same day. So if we actually look closely at the evidence, you'll see there's a lot of problems with 7/7. This is the boss of the company that runs the CCTV security, at least part of it, on the London Underground since it was privatised. He's ex-Israeli Defence Force, and he's now in Namibia. He ran off with $13 million, and he's being prosecuted by the Americans. So this is the kind of company which is now a private company which is running the security and was, at the time of 7/7, of the CCTV surveillance on the London Underground. Here's another one. He's Variant Systems. He's also Israeli Defence Force, in this case, Israeli Defence Force Engineers, private company, running. I mean, most of you would probably think that it's London Underground that run the security, but it isn't. It's this private Israeli company plus other companies. And here's Benjamin Netanyahu. And here's the 7.6 billion to 1 chance that it's a coincidence that Peter Power's drills were the same, were nothing to do with the actual bombings themselves. He's recently said that it was Reed Elsevier that commissioned his terror drills on the same day as 7/7. And it just turns out that as the XL Arms Fair used to be run by these people, Reed Elsevier. So they obviously got quite close links to private military companies. The XL Arms Fair, if you don't know, is the one in Docklands. There were big protests at. Until recently, it was only because Reed Elsevier also controlled the Lancet, the medical newspaper, that one of their AGMs, the Lancet people, forced them to stop doing the XL Arms Fair. Other things, I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of other stories which have been quite harrowing and to various degrees suppressed. But here, I just want to get on to, I'm going to go whizzing through some of this stuff because I want to get to the stuff to do with the Bullingdon Club. I mean, there's loads of stuff to do with Diana, but let's not go there right now. I mean, this is just, I mean, these are the people involved here. And of course, there's the Duke of Edinburgh on the left there. Many people don't realise he's actually a field marshal in the British Army as well, which is a little bit frightening. And this is Prince Charles's residence, and Charles's little phoenix he's got. If you're ever down in Tetbury in Gloucestershire, go and have a little ramble and a tiny trespass where Prince Charles is. And round the back of his house, you'll see this. This is his little phoenix on a pole. It's really a bit distasteful, but I don't know why is that doing there. So here we go, on to the what was called Yacht Gate. And this was a rare, big-time mention of the Rothschilds in the newspapers here. And if people noticed what was going on there, it was basically showing that on this guy's yacht in Corfu, there are all the supposedly different political parties colluding on the same yacht. And it was really interesting to see all this stuff coming out at the time. It then led to talk about the Bullingdon Club. And this was something that Peter Hitchens pointed out in the Daily Mail. Look at this picture of the Bullingdon Club. Initially, people were looking at the picture and it was in the papers, but no one saw that we've got a lapel there on the left and what looks like on the right, and the left another part of someone's shirt, and the rest of them has been airbrushed out. So who else is in the Bullingdon Club? That's what I want to know. Now, I did a bit of digging around on this subject, and it looks like possibly Mark Thatcher is one of those lapels, but there is a real sensitivity about this. And it seems that we've got something which is a little bit similar to this Skull and Bones organisation, which is at the university, the Ivy League universities in the United States, where you can see George Bush there somewhere on the left, just the left of the grandfather clock. And of course, he was in the same organisation, the Skull and Bones, as John Kerry in the run-up to the last US elections, not these ones just gone. The Skull and Bones, I think it's interesting because this Skull and Bones logo you see all sorts of places. This is, I mean, it was on the Nazi SS uniforms and that kind of thing, but also this is a far-right magazine in the UK, but funnily enough, also the far left. Isn't that weird? This is class war. You've got the Skull and Bones again. And this is something which is a little bit more peculiar because this is from the Earth First, I think it's that sort of movement anyway. If you have a look there, you can see, again, you've got the sort of, it's not cross bones, it's a hammer and some sort of wrench and a skull thing in the middle there. But this is quite this is a dark, satanic type logo. This is a really good book. This has come out recently. If you're interested in this subject, the Hellfire Clubs. This is a tradition which has been going on for hundreds of years. A lot of people in power like to have these kind of bawdy clubs with dodgy connections. One of the great things about all this is that there are lots of leaks, and this is the best. I've got a copy of the book here. A lot of people go for this thing called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. This is being shoved at you, people, because they want you to pick it up so they can say, what a fool. This is what I think is the real version of the Protocols of Zion, which is a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy. Here it is, published in 1798 by a Scottish Freemason, saying the Freemasons are being infiltrated by these people. He was also a fluent German speaker, and he translated loads of the original Illuminati texts into English for everyone to read if they want to. Now, it's not so easy to get this in Britain. It's not been published in Britain for a while, but it's been published abroad. Anyway, let's whiz through here. A bit of Dennis Wheatley. We were hearing about Obama earlier. Look at this, behind him. This was going to be the main centrepiece of Hitler's Berlin, straight behind Mr. Obama. Now, I don't know if he knows that or not. I think he's probably been duped here. But this is the big thing he did in Germany, and they had a big concert to get all the crowds, and then the concert people turned around and there was Obama. So there it is. This is the link, I think, between the royal family now and the original Nazis. So you've got Albert Speer, who was the main architect of Hitler, and Prince Charles is supposed to be one of his biggest fans. What on earth is Charles doing? Giving the thumbs up to Albert Speer? I have no idea. But this was what Speer wanted to have and Hitler wanted to have in the centre of the new, what Hitler was going to call Germania. And that's the front page of this book. I must wind up. Let's go through some of this Freemasonry type stuff here. Just show you one or two things, because we've got here in Bristol the two poles just outside our police station. The two Masonic pillars, Joachim and Boaz. Fantastic. That's inside Bristol's Freemason Hall. I took some pictures in there. That's the Craft Temple, which is for the Little Masons. And this is the Royal Arch one with this kind of phallus thing. What's that doing in there? Along with the flags of the 12 tribes of Israel. What are they doing in there? This is the Royal Arch Temple. As you can see on the floor there, they've got these stars of David. You often find that the Masonic halls have open days, so go in there with your camera and have a good old snap, as I did. Here he is, United Grand Lodge Grand Master of World Freemasonry, the Duke of Kent. And here he is, and whoops, here he is. There he is on the right, with his Field Marshal's uniform again. A bit worrying to think that the army are being steered around by these people. Anyway, I just want to give you a little brief sort of insight, hopefully, into some of the sort of Christian tradition, which I've got a little handout if people want to come and pick them up afterwards, which is a little bit different from the last time I did this. But we've got the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, and the pale horse. The white horse is a victory of some sort, and the idea of this is to warn us. It's people from the past, from 2,000 or so years ago, saying, when this stuff happens, wake up and get reading Revelation. And it doesn't matter whether you believe the Bible, whether you believe Revelation is anything to do with God or not, because you can be sure that the Christian Zionists and other people are making their plans for the world a mimicry of Revelation. They will be trying to make out that they're the good guys in Revelation. Do you see the point I'm trying to make? It doesn't matter if I believe this stuff, but it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. This is their recipe to con as many people as they can into thinking that they're the good guys in the prophecy. The red horse, which is the next one in time, is the major world war. The black horse is quite clearly, if you read Revelation, economic collapse and food scarcity, which is starting to stare us in the face now. And the pale horse is famine and disease, which wipes out a third of the world's population. Anyway, like I say, I've got a handout afterwards for anyone that wants it for the other 18 events that Revelation talks about. So, the swine flu panic. Now, is this getting us ready for something? I certainly think it is. This swine flu seems to me to be a major media frenzy. I don't know why everyone is getting so het up and uptight about it, because it's hardly killing anybody. Flu kills lots of people anyway. I think it's all about fear. It's all about using the media for fear. So we've got a few solutions. I don't have to wind up now, but remember the English Civil War. Please just understand what happened there. This is the merchant classes, this is the bankers fighting the feudal classes, the landowners. And this is still a battleground today within the ruling class, within the establishment. This is what's going on. Charles I banned enclosure. He stopped the privatisation of land just before the Civil War. He fined something like 300 greedy merchants who were privatising land, kicking peasants off their land. I would argue that that's why the merchant classes fought back and chopped his head off in the Civil War. Now, there's a thought for you, because most people will say, oh, it's nothing to do with that, there are all sorts of other reasons. If you have a look at it, this is one of the main reasons, I think, that the merchant class in this country was absolutely pissed off with Charles I, because he stopped their little game of privatisation. There's also a lot of stuff to do with Highland clearances there, and this is why this is relevant today, because we've got loads and loads of empty properties across this country, and there are people being evicted as we speak right across the country too. A big wave of repossessions as people lose their jobs or whatever and find that they just can't pay their mortgage. People even being evicted because the person that owns their home can't pay the mortgage, and so they're being evicted by the bank. So this is what we're seeing now, is a move from covert operations, I think, to a more open form of warfare. And this is a sort of symbol of spiritual warfare. And here's another ingredient in all this, is Vladimir Putin, who, funnily enough, has got a cross around his neck there. I think he's a subtle man, Putin. I don't think he's quite like the blunderbuss that George Bush and the American faction are. And there he is showing his pectorals and stuff. A little bit, slightly flabby, but probably better than me, actually. And let's remember that this is what he's got as well. He can fight back. Putin can definitely fight back if he wants to and he needs to, as he showed in Georgia this year. This is the thing, one of the things I think everyone has seen, this new formula of the war on terror, which is these endless wars. What did Putin do in Georgia or in South Ossetia? Yeah? It was a short war and it finished very quickly, decisive. And I think that shows something about the way that the Russians are operating these days. They're not into this whole New World Order thing. And as a solution, I would always recommend just steeping yourself in the Lord of the Rings, because in the 1930s, C.H. Charles in Oxford was translating loads of Old Testament Apocrypha into the English language for the first time. And people like Tolkien were picking up on all this stuff. This is the eye of Sauron. Is that the Illuminati eye? Well, this is the eye that was used as a metaphor in the books. And the white hand of Saruman, who's the wizard who's gone astray. Yeah, he's sold his soul to the dark side. This is the white hand that Tolkien uses. And I think there's lots and lots in that book which is really sort of uplifting to do with the struggle that we're having today. So this is one of my messages for you, is you've got a Bible, have it dusted off, have a look particularly at Daniel and Revelation. Because even if you don't believe that this is God-inspired stuff, you're going to have to get to know it, because they're going to be using these metaphors, they already are in the future, particularly the Israelis. So this is the message, really, which is to organise and get active. Because September the 11th was really the final gambit, I think, and the final clash of civilizations. And like I say, believe it or not, we really do have to understand Revelation in order to understand the way that we're going to be manipulated in the future, and we're already being manipulated now. Look at Christian Zionism. What they're saying is, we are the chosen people in Israel, that we can do what we want. We've got to get rid of all these people out of the land because it's our land. Now, this is a lie. This is a lie. But it's a lie which has been convincing many people, not so much in this country, but in the US. So anyway, thank you very much for inviting me, Ian, and thank you very much, everyone, for listening today.